Chapter 25, Big Melvin. Soon, Ingrid Ashley from Channel 4 Eyewitness News arrived at the scene. "How do you manage to destroy the Robo-Boogers?" she asked. "I'll answer that," said Melvin Sneedly as he swooped in front of the cameras. He was robed in some old drapes that he had tied around his neck at the last minute, and he looked quite silly. "I, Big Melvin, fought those monsters with my mighty superpowers," Melvin fibbed. "Then I destroyed them with my super smart brain." "No, you didn't," said Harold. "You weren't even here," said George. "Don't listen to those guys," said Melvin. "I, Big Melvin, am the real hero here." Melvin flew above the two defeated Robo-Boogers and used his new laser eye beams to burn the letters B and M in front of the dead creatures. "Just like Zorro," said Big Melvin, "I shall sign my initials on all of my heroic handiwork. From now on, whenever you see a big BM, you'll think of me." "That's funny," said George. "Big BMs have always made me think of you." Big Melvin flew over to Captain Underpants and grabbed him by the arm. "Now," said Big Melvin, "the entire world shall bear witness to the humiliating defeat of Captain Underpants." Suddenly, George and Harold got an idea. They turned and ran back to the school while Big Melvin continued to threaten Captain Underpants. "I command you to bow down to me," shouted Big Melvin. "Never!" said Captain Underpants. "You shall bow down to me!" Big Melvin yelled. "I shan't!" cried Captain Underpants. "Then," said Big Melvin as he untied the drapes around his neck, "you will feel the power of my wrath!" Chapter 26, The Drapes of Wrath. Big Melvin held his drapes tightly, then smacked Captain Underpants into the shoe with them. "I command you to deny underwear and accept the power of Big Melvin!" he shouted. "No way, Bubs!" cried Captain Underpants. Big Melvin smacked Captain Underpants again. Smack. "Bow down to me," he commanded, "and I shall spare your life!" "Aw, go jump off a dog," said Captain Underpants defiantly. Suddenly, George and Harold returned to the scene, out of breath and hiding something behind their backs. "Hey, Big Melvin!" shouted George, huffing and puffing. "What?" yelled Big Melvin. Harold pulled the Combinatron 2000 out from behind his bag and aimed it at Melvin and Captain Underpants. "You shouldn't leave your toys lying around the library, Bub," George said slyly. Melvin shrieked in horror as Harold pulled the trigger. Blast! A blinding flash of pink light shot out of the Combinatron 2000, surrounding Melvin and Captain Underpants and squishing them together. George had reset the control to combine them both, transfer the superpowers back to Captain Underpants, then separate them. "I sure hope this works," said Harold. "Me too," said George. Zap. Chapter 27. To make a long story short, it did. Bonk. Chapter 28. With big underwear comes big responsibility. Big Melvin fell to the ground with a thud. Immediately, Captain Underpants began floating in the air. "Hey!" cried the good captain. "I've got my superpowers back! I knew that underwear would never let me down!" George turned and zapped the Channel 4 Eyewitness News team with the Forgetchamacaw 2000. Flash! Suddenly, the Channel 4 Eyewitness News team, as well as everyone at home watching the story unfold on Channel 4 Eyewitness News, immediately forgot what had just happened. The horror was over, everything was back to normal, and everyone was happy. Well, everyone except Big Melvin, that is. "Wah!" sobbed Melvin. "I want my superpowers back." "Quit your whining, Bub," said George. "You've been a total jerk for the last 2 books. You should just be happy that you didn't get your comeuppance." Chapter 29. Comeuppance See Me Sometime. Soon a crowd gathered and began to recognize Melvin. "Hey!" cried Miss Ansrope. "That's the little squid who said he was going to find my hiney." "There he is!" shouted a couple of very angry old ladies. "That's the little brat who left us up in a tree." "He made us lose the big game!" cried the entire football team simultaneously. "Dudes," yelled one of the skateboarders. "That's the little dude who did our dude boards a few dudes ago." Laughed Melvin nervously. "Maybe I'll just go home now." "Get him!" shouted the old ladies. "Ah!" screamed Melvin as he ran away, followed closely by a large group of very angry people. Chapter 30, Harold's Surprise. As Melvin and his angry mob ran off into the sunset, George and Harold had just one last thing to deal with. A quick squirt of water to Captain Underpants' face was all it took to bring him back to his scrubby old self. "Well, that takes care of that," said George, and the two boys walked back to their treehouse. As George climbed up the ladder to the treehouse, Harold became quite fidgety. Said Harold nervously. "There's something I should probably tell you, George." But when George reached the top of the ladder and looked inside the treehouse, no explanation was necessary. "Hey," said George, "I thought you told me to take Crackers back to his home." "I did," said Harold, "back to his new home." "Harold," said George sternly, "we can't keep a pet pterodactyl. Do you know how many crackers they need to eat every day? We can never afford it." "I know," said Harold sadly. "But look how cute he is. And he's made friends with Sulu too. Can't we keep him for just one night?" "Well, all right," said George. "But we're taking him back tomorrow." Chapter 31, Tomorrow. The next day, George, Harold, and Sulu returned to school with Crackers tucked snugly into Harold's book bag. Together, the four friends sneaked back upstairs to the library, where the purple potty stood before them in all its forbidden glory. "Come on," said George. "Let's give this baby another spin." "I don't know," said Harold. "Maybe we should give it a day to cool off." "Nah, I'm sure it can be used 2 days in a row," said George. "What could possibly go wrong?" "But didn't Melvin warn us not to use this machine 2 days in a row?" asked Harold. "Yeah," said George. "Back in chapter 12, starting with the first word in the third line of the second paragraph on page 77. "What exactly did he say?" asked Harold. "Beats me," said George. "I'm not very good at remembering details." Well, I don't know about this," said Harold. "What if our journey brings about the end of the world as we know it?" "That's ridiculous," said George. "It all sounds like a setup for the sequel to a really cheesy children's book." The four friends stepped inside the purple potty and closed the door behind them. George set the control to return them to the Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era and then pulled the chain. Suddenly, an orange light began flashing wildly. "Hey, I don't remember seeing an orange light before," said Harold. Then the purple body began to shake and rock violently. "I don't remember this thing shaking and rocking before either," said George. "Something is wrong," cried Harold. "Something is terribly, terribly wrong." Suddenly, the entire room lit up with an explosive burst of lightning, and the purple body began to disappear into a whirlwind of electric air. The only thing that could be heard above the chaotic ladder was the sound of 2 terrified voices screaming into the unknown abyss. "Oh no!" screamed one of the voices. "Here we go again!" screamed the other. About the Author-Illustrator. When Dave Pilkey was a kid, he was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. Dave was so disruptive in class that his teachers made him sit out in the hallway every day. Luckily, Dave loved to draw and make up stories. He spent his time in the hallway creating his own original comic books, the very first adventures of Dogman and Captain Underpants. In college, Dave met a teacher who encouraged him to write and illustrate for kids. He took her advice and created his first book, World War I, which won a national competition in 1986. Dave made many of the books before being awarded the California Young Reader Medal for Dog Breath, 1994, and the Caldecott Honor for the Paperboy, 1996. In 2002, Dave published his first full-length graphic novel for kids, called The Adventures of Super Diaper Baby. It was both a USA Today and New York Times bestseller. Since then, he has published more than a dozen full-length graphic novels for kids, including the best-selling Dogman and Cat Kid Comic Club series. Dave's stories are semi-autobiographical and explore universal themes that celebrate friendship, empathy, and the triumph of the good-hearted. When he is not making books for kids, Dave loves to kayak with his wife in the Pacific Northwest. Learn more at Pilkey.com. It's boogie time! George and Harold blasted the Bionic Booger Boy back into brainiac Melvin Sneedly and thought their fears of phlegm were behind them. But they forgot about the rotten Robo-Boogers. In an epic adventure that spans space and time, only Captain Underpants can mop away these mucus monsters. Featuring the world-famous cheesy animation technique that lets you animate the action. Have you read your underpants today? Pilkey.com. Scholastic, planetpilkey.com. $12.99 US. $16.99 CAD. ISBN 978-1-338-86435-9. 51299. 978-1338-86435-9.